Why did you do that? Why did you do that? Now we can't shoot them. Why?
Oh no!
Why would you... Well, fuck. Oh, Jesus Christ. Oh, fuck. Get out of there, fuck. Jesus Christ. You're fucking gassing our teammates, god damn it.
God damn it, I'm the one with German blood here.
Welcome to the first and possibly only 5-on-5 addendum. The point of this video is to make a follow-up for my first ever video. I don't plan on doing follow-ups often, but my first video was pretty half-baked for a few reasons, so I think it deserves it. Seeing how it was my first time ever making a video, my skills as a writer and editor were pretty limited. Same goes for my knowledge and skills related to airsoft. This is true of a lot of my early content, so expect remakes of some of the older stuff, just not addendum style videos like this one. Also, I'd only put 19,000 rounds through that gun when I made the video, and I try to have a minimum of 25 before I begin making a review. If I can get this video done in time, it'll go public on the 3rd anniversary of the original review.
Oh, this is the best, the finest bootleg.
I guess I'll start with what hasn't changed. The battery compartment still rocks, it's still pretty quiet, more on that in a bit. I still haven't found that useless bipod after throwing it into the woods.
Get the fuck out of here, bitch! Woo!
And its combination of length, low weight, and flimsy plastic body have earned it the title of Creekosaurus Rex.
Confusion!
I mentioned in the review that the gearbox is a standard version 2 with the exception of the selector plate, but that's not entirely true. The nozzle isn't a standard M4 nozzle. It's slightly longer, at 21.6mm instead of the standard 21.2. The stock nozzle had no O-ring and MP5 written on the side. I ordered an aftermarket nozzle designed for MP5s, but it was too short. Then I ordered a nozzle from a different company that was advertised as being made for G3s, and that was also too short. About a year passed, and I bought my SEMA MP5. While I had it disassembled for shimming, I measured the nozzle for curiosity's sake. It was 21.6mm.
What the fuck? You're playing mind games with me?
Whoa, that's a genuinely shocking fact.
I always appreciated that this gun was as quiet as it is, but I couldn't figure out why. After doing some unrelated testing with a bunch of different guns and a microphone, I discovered that plastic receivers absorb gearbox vibrations better than metal receivers do, and therefore reduce the perceived noise of the gun shooting. I guess that creaky ABS plastic is good for something after all.
You were very confident in your flank there. Just waltzing on and boop. Don't, what do you mean?
I described the ergonomics as a bit odd, but they grew on me in some strange form of Stockholm Syndrome. There were still a couple of things that didn't get better with time though. The placement of the mag release and the bulkiness of the mags guarantee that reloads are going to be slow. I made this improved mag release that you can hit with your trigger finger, which makes mag changes much faster. The shape of the handguard never felt right either. This version of the G3 is meant to be a marksman variant, so I guess the flat underside is meant more to be rested against sandbags than it's meant to be held with your support hand. Even after I added a carved piece of wood underneath to make it a bit comfier, it still felt a bit weird. I eventually bought a slim handguard to replace it, and it feels much better. It's so slim, it's actually a bit jarring if you're used to the bigger one. My only complaint is that it begs to be C-clamped, which is a bad idea with this gun. I eventually ran into some feeding issues with the high caps that were caused by a couple of different things. The screw holding the mag catch and release button together walked out, leaving the catch loose. This meant that mags wouldn't seat properly against the hop chamber, and sometimes even fall out of the mag well. You may have experienced this with an AR because the mag catch is assembled similarly. In an AR, the spring is sandwiched between the loop on the gearbox and the button, with only the screw holding everything together. The button sticks out further and further as the screw walks out, making the problem easy to spot before you lose any parts. The G3's release button and spring are inserted into the right half of the receiver and are captivated when the two halves of the receiver are put together. The left half applies tension to the spring, pushing the button outward. If the screw holding the catch and button together walks out, the button doesn't move and the catch can still sit in its correct position with the screw backed off. This makes it less obvious when the screw is walking out. The best option is to Loctite this screw proactively. The mag catch assembly doesn't need to be removed to free the gearbox like an AR, so you shouldn't have to worry about removing it. The magazines themselves also had some issues. The clock spring tabs on the winding wheels broke off in 5 of my mags. This is a common failure point on high caps, but it usually doesn't happen this consistently. There's always the possibility that my mags came from a bad batch, but a low-end brand like JG is bound to have those often. Another thing I've had issues with was the claw mounts for optics rails. They fall into 2 categories, 2-screw and 4-screw mounts. The 2-screw mounts have a horizontal screw on the same side of each claw. As you tighten them, the whole mount will tilt off level. This isn't a huge issue with red dots that sit low on the rail, but it becomes a problem when you get into risers and magnified optics. You can level it out by shimming the mount where it touches the receiver, but then the rail is shifted off-center. The 4-screw mounts have a vertical screw at each hook. This means that you can adjust the tension on each screw to ensure the mount is level. The problem is that you can't put enough tension on the screws to secure the mount without the hooks pinching the receiver enough to prevent the mock bolt from moving freely. This problem isn't limited to plastic receivers either.
Get the shit stuck! Out of my way, son! Door stuck! Door stuck! Please! I beg you! We're dead! You're a genuine dick sucker!
I'd like to assume the severity of these issues will vary depending on the brand of the mount, and I just happen to buy the shitty ones. That being said, I'm not interested in wasting 3 figures to buy every claw mount I can just to test that theory. On top of that, the G3 isn't the only platform that uses claw mounts, but not all claw mounts will fit on a G3. It needs to have these slots on either side of at least one claw to fit on a G3. This detail isn't always advertised or made obvious by online retailers. Some of them require the rear sight to be removed as well. Some real steel G3s have a rail welded to the receiver, and that seems like a much better solution. Sadly, nobody seems to have brought this trend to the airsoft world.
Fuck this broke dick piece of shit.
I mentioned that I only put 19k through this gun when I made the review, but now I have over 50k through it, and I have a much better idea of its service life. The trigger return spring snapped at 23k. A little disappointing to have that break fairly early in its service life, but easy enough to fix. Replacing that spring was my first time opening the gearbox, and the first thing I noticed was that the gears appeared to be coated with dried up Big Mac sauce.
You want penis enlargement pills?
The trigger contacts fried at about 28k. This is normal for a gun being run exclusively on 9.6 volt batteries without a MOSFET, but advertising this gun as LiPo ready seems a bit dishonest. At around 35k, the muzzle energy started to drop. This was caused by the spring and piston O-ring wearing out, but I was surprised to see the cylinder head had 2 O-rings instead of 1. There's not much point in having a gun this long if it doesn't have as much muzzle energy as you're allowed, so I installed a heavier spring because I didn't have the money at the time to replace the compression parts. I did eventually replace them though, which is how I found out about the weird nozzle length. While swapping out the spring, I noticed the gearbox comes with this 2-piece spring guide. When you turn this screw clockwise, it pushes the bell piece forward and puts extra tension on the spring and gives you up to 10 feet per second. At 36k, the motor had worn out pretty bad and the tappet plate fin snapped off. Shortly after that, the right side screw for the selector pin broke and the whole selector fell out. The head of the screw is what broke off, so I couldn't take the threaded portion out of the pin, rendering it useless. It's also worth noting that most other G3 selectors work the same as an AR selector instead of using this stupid cross pin design. I opted to drill a hole through the selector switch in the gearbox to make room for a cotter pin. I didn't realize at the time that cotter pins aren't meant to be reused. After breaking a couple of cotter pins, I switched to a long 632 screw with a nut on the other side to hold it in place with some washers and O-rings to reduce the friction on the selector when the nut is tight. The nut gradually walks out as you flip the selector back and forth, but I can tighten it by hand so it's not a big deal. At 44K, the spur and sector gears strip teeth.
Switch mags. Oh, we'll top off. Yeah. That's not good.
And the gearbox shell cracked at around 50K. It's worth noting that I had installed an M120 spring shortly before the gears stripped and a metal cylinder head at around 48K, but that's still a long time for a cheap gearbox to last. When I went to replace the shell, I noticed the stock shell had these bevels on the back. My replacement shell didn't have those bevels and wouldn't fit, so I made some with a Dremel. While I'm not surprised that a cheap gun had most of its factory parts fail one after another, I was impressed that they lasted as long as they did. After most of the stock parts had been replaced, I decided to build it into a DMR. I had good parts picked out and installed, and the plastic body was easy to drill and tap for a screw to block the full auto setting. But the plastic externals came back to haunt me. No matter what barrel and bucking I installed or how heavy the BBs, the barrel flex made sure it couldn't even hold a torso-sized group beyond 30 or 40 meters. It's possible that the barrel flex issue became worse with time and use, but you can't really fix that anyway. When I started this channel, I planned to write reviews with open-ended conclusions. I wanted people to look at my findings and make their own decision. Now that I'm more experienced, I'm confident that I can finish with a concrete answer that's ultimately more helpful. Which begs the question, is the JG T3K1 worth buying? As baby's first battle rifle? Yeah, sure. Just stick to low voltage batteries and get the most mileage out of the trigger contacts. As a base gun to be upgraded and accessorized for more serious use? Maybe save up for an LCT or a classic army.
We fucking did it!